Since When Am I Faust? Chapter 6, Part 2. I felt my heart flutter as she said this, and I smiled. It was fascinating to learn, even if it was only a small amount, just what type of person Lauren was before we met. But on the other hand, I just couldn't pass up the opportunity to tease Cadence. Her speech was just too polished, like something you would read in a book. I looked at the pink alicorn and raised an eyebrow, as a grin plastered itself on my face.
Well, you did your research after my return, didn't you?
Her eyes widened and her cheeks flushed red with embarrassment.
Well, I was curious.
I hugged her tighter with my wing and let my head rest on her.
I'm glad.
Cadence smiled at me, and she returned the improvised hug. Meanwhile, Twilight returned to my other side, lost in her thoughts. A moment later, she turned to Cadence.
But I thought that story was just a legend.
She said this as she glanced up at me in surprise. I smirked.
You'd be surprised at how many fictional stories are actually real.
I said this as I thought of my own situation. The unicorn looked down, contemplating this thought, as she looked back to the Nightmare Moon incidents. Nodding to herself, she began making plans to read over as many folktales and legends as she could when she got back to the library. After that, the three of us continued to walk on in silence for a time. We came across a ravine at the bottom of the cavern, and Twilight teleported us all across. Afterwards, she had to rest for a minute because transporting Cadence and me put a lot of strain on the unicorn. While Twilight recovered from her headache, I took the opportunity to sit down and relax. Ahead of us, Cadence was looking around for a pathway that we could use. Just as my muscles began to relax, she came around the corner and directed us to a minecart. It was filled with rocks, and it was on a track that spiraled down. At the end of the spiral, the tracks turned upwards, facing an exit blocked off with boulders. The two mares looked at one another as if contemplating whether or not they could make it. They took rocks out of the minecart and looked over at me expectantly.
Well?
Cadence said, indicating for me to get in. My heart sped up at the very thought, and I desperately called out to my passenger for help.
I don't want to go on the cart!
She didn't respond, but I could feel that she felt the same way. I looked around hoping to find any other alternative route, but there weren't any. Reluctantly, I lifted my front leg and leaned forward, an unsure expression dawning on my face as I hesitated. Looking down, I observed how the track had collapsed a long time ago, and I had no desire to be thrown into that pit. I just couldn't bring myself to get into this death trap. My hesitation worked against me though, because as Twilight finished removing all the rocks, my still form made it easy for Cadence to place me in the cart. I was shaking my head furiously, and Cadence climbed in front of me. Twilight grabbed the back of the cart and pushed it to get it going. Its rusty wheels slowly broke free from the corrosion, and with a sudden jolt, we were off. Spiraling down the track, the two of us in the cart leaned to the right, trying desperately to keep the car from derailing. Meanwhile, Twilight had grabbed onto the back of the cart and was trying to keep it from being thrown off. As we neared the bottom, the track straightened out and the cart rocketed down towards the broken part of the bridge. The three of us cried out as we launched into the air. Despite the pain, I unfurled my wings and used them to glide. Cadence and I also grabbed Twilight, and the three of us watched as the cart fell into the abyss. Twilight sighed in relief, and the three of us landed on the other side. I didn't mean to, but once we were over solid ground, I tried to let the purple unicorn down gently. My arm gave out and she tumbled to the ground, and meanwhile I skidded on shaky legs and collapsed. I then slid to a halt while lying on my stomach. Cadence was the only one out of the three of us to have a graceful landing. I stretched, letting my joints pop and slide into place. I was just so looking forward to getting out of here. Groaning, I pushed myself up on the ground. From our new vantage point, we could see some light flowing in from the ceiling of the cavern.
Lauren, are we able to take everyone this time? I don't want to put Twilight under too much strain. I would, but taking three of us requires a lot of concentration. In our state, we could miss it. I won't risk that. Okay.
I nodded and then looked up.
One more.
I whispered out, looking at the light. Cadence walked up and I draped my wing over her back. Thankfully, I was no longer bleeding, but my muscles were still aching. Seeing the light of day filled the three of us with hope. I pulled Twilight in, partially for my own support, but I also wanted to include her in the hug that I was giving Cadence. The three of us stood on the ledge, huddled close together. Twilight looked at Cadence.
Ready? Ready.
She nodded, and then the unicorn looked at me.
Lauren?
I smiled, and gave her a firm nod, but said nothing.
Okay then.
The purple mare looked directly at her target. Twilight's eyes narrowed and her horn shined bright. There was a sound like charging electricity, and the light from her horn quickly expanded and enveloped the three of us. With one quick poof, we were gone. We appeared on the other side, and I clutched the unicorn tightly to keep her from falling over. Twilight brought a hoof up against her head and massaged her temple. The sudden headache was taking a toll on the pony. Suddenly, the sound of falling pebbles caught our attention. From the cave's exit, we saw three mares emerge. It was the three bridesmaids that followed Chrysalis around, and it felt somewhat unsettling watching the faces of Lyra and Minuet staring at us with those wicked smiles. I didn't recognize the third pony. She was an off-white cream color and her mane was deep pink. Twilight stepped back, as did Cadence.
Why are they here?
The unicorn exclaimed. I stood up straight and faced our adversaries.
Changelings.
Cadence walked forward to stand with me. We both stared down at the trio approaching us, and I continued.
Erase the feeds off of love.
Cadence looked disgusted at the reminder, and a frown made his way into her muzzle. The trio approached us, lowering their heads, and they said with a hiss,
You're not going anywhere.
As they spoke, they bared their teeth, obviously forgetting that they were wearing pony disguises. They looked more silly showing their teeth than they did threatening. Cadence huffed, tossing her mane to the side.
Yeah, right.
Her horn lit up with a bright blue hue, and a nearby boulder suddenly broke free from the ground. It was flat on one side, and it was round around the other. Cadence then threw it at the three, and it swept them all up against the wall. There was a sudden cry of complaints from three as they realized that they were trapped.
Come on, that won't hold them for long.
Cadence said, and the three of us began making a run for the exit. We could hear the sounds of wings buzzing from behind the boulder as they tried to push it off themselves. We ran up the pile of small stones and found ourselves to be climbing out of a dried up well. To our surprise, it was in the castle gardens, and I looked on in surprise while Cadence helped me pull out of the well. The three of us then made our way to the castle. I was still slowing them down, but this time I was able to take more of my own weight as they supported me. When we got close to the castle, the guards at the doors took one look at me and began taking immediate action. They ran over and got 2 patrol guards to escort us through the castle. The staff and nobility were stunned to see the three of us walking through the halls, but I was just glad that my coat had dried off by this point. Walking up to a triple intersection, Twilight and Cadence began pushing me to the right. Confused, I started to struggle and I pointed down the hall, saying,
Girls, the wedding hall is this way.
However, they kept pushing.
You're going the wrong way!
Cadence didn't look at me. She simply stared forward to her destination and said,
We are going to the wedding hall. You, on the other half, are going to the hospital.
My head spun around as I looked at her.
But isn't that too far to go and come back to stop the wedding in time?
It was now Twilight's turn to speak up.
Actually, Celestia had a medical wing installed when she moved into Canterlot. She did this in case a visitor or castle member got hurt. Huh.
I looked down. I was a little disappointed to be shooed out of the action, but I understood their reasoning. Besides, it was as if there was already a silent agreement between the two mayors, one that I had no say in. They directed me down the hallway towards the medical ward. When we entered the hospital wing, the receptionist threw her arms up with a shriek upon seeing me. Slamming her hoof on the intercom, she yelled into a mic.
Code Red! Code Red! Princess in need of medical attention! All ponies on deck!
I looked towards the back and I could see doctors running back and forth behind the receptionist's desk. They were panicked, hurrying to get their medical equipment ready. Papers and clipboards flew into the air and littered the back room. A moment later, the whole medical staff suddenly burst through the door. I was amazed that they didn't fall. They were all shocked at my state when they saw me, and I gave them a weak smile. The doctors swarmed around me like piranhas, and they carried me into the back. Passing through the doors, I looked back at the two who had helped me get this far and waved. They waved back at me, and then they turned and ran out of the door. It was strange. Now that I knew that I was being taken care of, it felt as if a part of my mind clicked. And then, I suddenly was able to feel just how bad it was.
Oh.
It is amazing of how this fic can be dark, and then immediately afterwards go to something lighthearted, happy, that kind of stuff. Jesus Christ, dude, that is impressive. It's just good to see that Lauren is getting medical attention instead of suffering. Anywho, let's get on to our healthy donators. Top donators: TacoCat598, Peter Coulthard, J Tin Man, Darkside, Gauntlet, and Only One Thing, Zar630, Strix, Raiden, Narwhals, Black Moonheart, Drake Lovedragon, Pastel Skies, Austin Rowland, CrazyColor557, Stu Hex, Will, James Burner, Dospo, Delta Omega, Jack Hadge, RuneScythe9852, Leslie Prickett, Hunter Norman, Stephen Bingham, LineGod12, and many more angelic people. Thank you all so much for watching this video and live life to the fullest.